Cool. Okay then. So today we're going to be talking about fitting. More specifically, I'm going to give you a basic overview in the different tools you have available in order to, and also some guides as to what mentality it is clever to follow while fitting your ship. Do's and don'ts, things like this. I'm going to talk a bit about the basic UI in-game, about how to navigate the fitting window, where to find your fitting resources, what all the numbers mean, how to find different things, etc. I'm going to give a guide about what goes where when it comes to your slots. I'm also going to go quickly over rigs, particularly because they can be a bit confusing. And I'm going to talk about the simulator that you have in-game. It is quite new and very, very useful for all new bros. I'm also going to mention an out-of-game fitting tool. Then I'm going to go over to the mentality that you need to follow when you fit your ships. How you need to think when you fit your ship. Because the way I think when I fit ships do not apply to any one single ship. And
What do you mean by the last, the way you fit a ship doesn't apply to any other ship?
The way I fit ships doesn't apply to a specific ship. It applies to all ships. It is a three-point guide that will enable you to fit any ship very effectively. It sounds very simple, but it can be quite tricky in execution, so I will be repeating it a lot. And after I've talked about the mentality, both in tank, DPS, speed, blah, 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 I'm going to give you a test. I'm going to give you some fits, and I'm going to ask you guys to tell me what's wrong with them and how to improve them. Does this sound okay for everyone? Any questions before I start yapping my throat?
Nope, it's fine. Sounds good.
Alrighty then. I'm going to assume that everyone is currently logged on and docked up somewhere. If you are not, please do so now. When you have, I want you to hit Alt F to open your fitting window. This opens up a big circle in the middle of your screen. The fitting window has three parts. I'm going to start talking about the middle part, where you see the big circle. This is where your slots lie. At the top, you have your high slots. At the right, you have your mid slots. At the bottom are your low slots. And on the left are rigs and subsystems if you are located in a Tech 3. If you are in a Tech 3 destroyer, you also see your different modes on the left-hand side of the main UI. At the bottom right, you see a few numbers, CPU and power grid. Power grid corresponds with a red line at the bottom right hand of the circle. It's also at the complete bottom right hand of the center of your fitting window. Power grid is measured in megawatts. And power grid scales with the size of the ship. This becomes important later. While a frigate may have 50 or 60 power grid available, a carrier may have, 50, 60,000 power grid. Modules that take up a lot of power grid are things like active repair modules, buffer tank modules, and weapons. These tend to take up a lot of power grid. Your CPU corresponds to the blue line at the bottom right hand of your fitting circle. CPU is measured in teraflops, a computing unit. CPU does scale with size, but to a much lower degree. While a frigate may have 150, a carrier may have 300. So it scales a lot less. This means that bigger ships have a much easier time fitting CPU-heavy items than small ones in practice. Modules that use this are electronic warfare, capacitor modules, weapons, weapon upgrades, shield upgrades, hardeners. These use a lot of your CPU. Now, both CPU and power grid can be increased in one of many ways. One of the most important ways, of course, is to upgrade your skills. By skills, you can upgrade both your base power grid and CPU amount in your ship, and you can reduce the power grid and CPU need of specific modules. Weapon upgrades, for example, is a skill that reduces the CPU need of weapons. Power grid management increases the base amount of power grid you have available. This makes these very important skills that will positively affect almost any ship you fly in. This is why it's one of the Magic 14 skills.
Is there a list of the Magic 14 skills?
Yes, I'm going to see if I can find it and link it at the end of the class.
Thanks.
It is not pertaining specifically to this class, but I will link it at the end. Ah, thank you, Sunlight.
No problem.
There we go. It's linked. You can also increase both CPU and power grid by the use of rigs. I'm going to go over rigs in more detail later on. The third way to increase your power grid and CPU is through the use of implants, both skill hardwires and Genelution implants. These implants scale in costs from 1.5 million to 300 million. Use with caution and wear appropriately. In the cafe, Stravulus. It is linked in the cafe.
Okay.
And now also in Mumble.
Okay, I seem to lock myself out of the cafe. If you did that, how do you get back into cafe? Just type it in search channels?
That should be the way to do it, yes. You can also find it under player channels in the channel list when you click on the speech bubble. You should be able to find it there anyway. Okay, moving on. The third fitting resource is your calibration. This is a resource that cannot be increased in any way. You have a fitting resource called calibration, and you have as many as you have. You cannot make it more. The base amount is 400 calibration points per ship. Tech 2 ships and pirate ships have less calibration. You have 3 rig slots in standard Tech 1 ships. Tech 2 have 2 slots. Rigs are permanent modifications to your ship. And by permanent, I mean that once you put them on, you cannot take them off again without destroying them. However, they require no skills to put on, which can make them very powerful. When fitted with the correct skills, you can increase a ship's effectiveness dramatically. Either, like I said earlier, by increasing the fitting resources you have available, or you can increase resistances in a specific flavor, or you can increase your speed, your maneuverability, your cargo hold size, you can increase your DPS, you can increase your optimal range, you can increase pretty much all stats you want on rigs. And they are very handy. But, like I said, you cannot increase the amount of calibration you have available. Are there any questions as to the center window so far? No. I'm that good at explaining. I've gone a bit over the over the rigs, so I'll continue on with high slots. These are the ones at the top. Like I mentioned earlier, these are where you fit your weapons. What weapons depends on what hard points you have. You can see your hard points as either filled or empty dots, either to the left or to the right. If they are at the left hand of the high slots, you will see that they are next to a turret symbol. The number of dots correspond to the number of turret hardpoints you have. And if you hover over the dots, it will also say how many you have currently available or filled. If it's on the right-hand side, there will be launcher hardpoints. Hardpoints cannot be modified, with the exception of Tech 3 cruisers through the use of subsystems. So the amount of hardpoints you have and what they are in, either turret or launcher, cannot be modified for your ship. If you have only launcher hardpoints, you have to use launchers. If you only have turrets, you have to use turrets. Now usually you have more high slots than you have hard points. The extraneous high slots are called utility slots. These slots are where you would place things like cloaking devices, neuting systems, Nosferatus, targeting systems, these kinds of things, tracking beams, salvages. Tractor beams. Sorry, misspoke there. The number of utility slots can be important to a ship's efficacy. If you have a high number of utility slots, you may be a powerful neuting platform. Take the Armageddon, for example. Or the Marauders, which have 4 utility slots. Now, some ships have no utility slots. These are generally used as pure DPS ships or snipers, like the Naga or Oracle, in a sniper and pure DPS role, respectively. Any questions as to the high slots and what's put in them? No? Then we'll move to mid slots. Mid slots are to the right, right above your CPU. These are where you put your propulsion modules, some capacitor modules, some electronic warfare modules, with the exception of newts. And when I say E-War, I mean things like webifiers, scramblers, sensor dampeners, ECM, things like that. Mid slots are also where you put your shield tanking modules. Both shield recharges, shield buffer increases, and shield resistance increases tend to be in mid slots. This means that a shield tank ship will have all of its tank in the mid slots. This becomes important later. This also means that a shield tank ship is less effective as an E-War ship, which means that most E-War ships tend to have an armor tank on them. Notice that I say tend to, because of course there are exceptions. You also put certain important weapon upgrades, specifically tracking computers, in your mid slots. These can be critical, particularly to snipers, and I'm very fond of snipers. Any questions about the mid slots?
You say that most sniper ships, because of the mid slots and what you can put in there, are armor based?
I would say there tend to be a surplus of armor-based snipers, but snipers also tend to rely on a distance tank, which means that they have neither an armor or a shield tank. They tend to rely on being too far away for others to hit them.
So basically, they would go with gyros, heat sinks, whatever in the lows, and tracking computers with various scripts in the mids. just to have maximum efficiency.
So if
Exactly.
they drop exactly on top of them, you will annihilate them without problem.
Indeed. Very true. I'll be talking in more detail about the mentality behind that when I come to my mentality section.
Okay.
But before that, low slots. Low slots, like you said, is where you put your passive weapon upgrades, like heat sinks and gyro stabs. Things like that. It's also where you put weapon upgrades. Armor tanks, sorry. I said weapon upgrades twice then. It's where you put your armor tanks. This means that armor tank ships are not necessarily as DPS-y as shield tank ships. But armor tank ships have more utility because they have more mid slots available for E-War and propulsion. I should also mention that Capacitor has both mid and low slot modules. So whatever tank you choose or whatever focus you choose, you will be able to increase your capacitor in some way. You can also put hull upgrades in the low slots. Hull upgrades can be very, very important. One I guarantee that you have heard of is the damage control, which is a critical module to have if you are in PvP, because it massively increases your tank. Things like nanofibers and inertial modifiers, reinforced bulkheads, all these fit in your low slots, and they can have a great impact on how your ship behaves. These are called hull upgrades and are found in the market under hull upgrades as well. I should also mention that certain modules have stacking penalties on them. Stacking penalties means that if you put more than a certain number of a module on, they will have reduced efficacy. Passive weapon upgrades are stacking penalized. If you are curious if a module is stacking penalized, you can show info on it, and under the description tab it will say penalty. Using more than one type of this module or similar modules that affect the same attribute on the ship will be penalized.
What's the penalty if you put more modules on?
I can explain it in 2 minutes.
Okay.
I'm not going to go into detail. Basically, what it is that if you put one module on, it's going to do all of its advertised effects. So if, for example, a module says that it's going to increase your DPS by 20%, if you put a single module on, it will increase your DPS by 20%. By 20%, yeah, because that's 100% of its advertised increase. But if you put two on, they are not going to increase your DPS by 40%. They are going to increase it by 38 or something in that region. I haven't done the exact math in my head. And if you put 3, it's not going to do 60, it's going to do 54. And so on and so forth. Basically, there is a lot of math involved, but a general rule of thumb is that it's not a good idea to put more than 3, in some cases 4, of the same module onto a ship if it is stacking penalized. If you do, you will have wasted fitting space, both slot-wise and fitting resource-wise. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess you could say the penalty is exponential. So for each module after the first, the penalty is going to be worse and worse for all of the modules. So after the fourth or fifth, you're probably not seeing much of a difference at all.
Yes.
Compared to the costs, which are
the same. Yeah. So basically, you will pay both fitting resources and ISK and slots to get no reward. If you put 5 magnetic field stabilizers on a ship, for example, you may get a certain damage increase. Say you get a total of 500 DPS. If you put the 6th module on there, you'll get 504 DPS. Not really worth it. This makes sense?
Yep.
Cool. Now I'm going to move on to the right-hand side of the fitting window. If you do not see anything beyond the circle, please click the 3 bars. If you hover over it, it'll say Attributes. There you'll see a couple of tabs, 6 of them specifically. Capacitor, Offense, Defense, Targeting, Navigation, and Drones. If you open them all, they will exactly fill your window. I recommend having them all open at the same time. There's no real point in closing them. These are a lot of numbers. I'm now going to explain them all. We'll start with the capacitor. The capacitor is at the very top. Straight out of the gate, you'll notice that there's a circle symbol, which is either completely full, completely empty, or partially filled with orange. This is a quick guide on how stable you are. If that circle symbol is empty, you are unstable, which means that if you run all of your modules at the same time, eventually you will run out of capacitor and you will not be able to activate any modules. You will see exactly how long by looking at the top right-hand corner of the capacitor tab, and it will say exactly how many hours, minutes, and seconds you have of cap life before you run out. This will be in red. If you have it either partially or completely full, you will be cap stable with all modules running permanently, which means that if you turn everything on, you can basically run it until the end of time and you will never run out of capacitor, which is a good thing, depending on what you do. It will also say stable in a nice soothing green color at the top right-hand corner of your capacitor tab. The numbers inside are as follows. On the top left-hand corner is measured in gigajoules, your total capacitor capacity. On the top right-hand is the amount of seconds it will take to get from completely empty capacitor to completely full. This tends to be at round about 2 minutes or slightly higher, some 3, some 4 minutes, depending on the ship. On the bottom left-hand corner, you will see delta capacitor. This is how much the capacitor is above or below peak recharge rate. It will also say in percent. For example, the ship I'm currently sitting in has a excess or positive 3 gigajoules per second. That means that if I put on another module that uses exactly 3 gigajoules per second, I will still be cap stable. I will use exactly as much capacitor as my capacitor is capable of giving. But if I put on a module that uses 5 gigajoules per second, I will no longer be cap stable. I will have negative 2 gigajoules per second of below peak recharge rate. Did this make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
Any questions to the capacitor tab? Peak recharge means it will not recharge at a linear rate.
This is correct.
But
It is,
depending on how much is in the capacitor.
yes, it is slowest at empty and full. The peak recharge rate occurs round about 30 degrees, 30% remaining capacitor. This is why, for example, in my logistics class, I say to everyone, never ever let your capacitor go below 30%. If you do, you're dead. Or worse, you can't rep anyone.
So the peak is at around 30%.
Around 30%, yes. There is a precise number, but I don't remember it in my head. Right. Any further questions to capacitor?
Yeah, so if I have a cap ancillary cap booster, the best point of time would be to activate it around at 30%.
Correct, yes. Activating it at 80% would be nigh on useless. because then you would rely on your cap injector for all your cap recharge, which means that you're not utilizing your ship as much as it is capable of giving you.
Roger.
I think another thing worth mentioning is the size of the capacitor capacity tells you how large of cap booster injectors you want to use. If you use one that is larger than your full capacitor, you're going to waste some capacitor power every time you use it.
This tends to not be a problem, however, as the biggest capacitor booster is 3200, and even cruisers have that amount of capacitor, but, you know, no cruiser is going to be able to fit extra large cap boosters onto their ships.
It is very relevant on a lot of frigates, though.
Indeed.
Can usually use 400s, even 800s at sometimes, with only a capacitor at around 250, 300.
Indeed. Now,
So the number of the booster, if it says 100, it means the number of what is going to recharge.
the number on your cap booster fuel is how many gigajoules it's worth. If it says 800, it's going to put 800 gigajoules into your capacitor. If you only have 400 gigajoules capacity, you're going to waste 400.
Logical.
Okay then, moving on to offense. This is how much damage you can deal. The most important number is the damage per second, which you can see in the top right-hand corner in the tab. This, naturally, is the amount of pure damage you put out every second. Note, however, that this is before resistances on your hostile. On your target, I should say. In the tab itself, it will be split. On the left-hand side, you will see your damage per second again, but if you hover over it, you will see that it is split into turrets, launchers, and drones. If you have turrets, launchers, and drones. If you only have turrets, it will only show turret DPS. If you have something that reloads, it will also say what your DPS is over long time, which means that they include the reload time in the DPS number. This is really only significant in PvE forever. On the right hand is your alpha strike or volley damage. This is the amount of pure damage you can do in a single strike. Autocannons, for example, are very weak in alpha strike, but artillery is very, very strong in alpha strike. Large artillery, for example, can deal up to 20 or even 30,000 damage in a single volley. But they take 15 to 20 seconds between shots. This can be particularly important in PvP. Volley strike is much less important in PvE. Does this make sense to everyone, or do I need to explain why? Hello?
I think it would make sense. It makes sense.
Okay then. Are there any questions to the offense tab? No. Okay. Defense tab. Now this one looks like the most complicated. It really isn't. The most important number is in the top right-hand corner. Again, these are your effective hit points, for short, EHP. This is how much damage you can take from another ship before you die. For example, in my current ship, I have 5,000 EHP. If I take 500 DPS from another man, from another ship, it will take 10 seconds before I die. Does this make sense?
Yep.
Now this number includes resistances. So there are two ways to increase your EHP. One you can increase the number of pure HP you have, i.e. buffer tank, or you can increase your resistances, i.e. resistance tank. These, of course, can be combined. You will note that there are a 3x4 field of different colours in your defense tab. From left to right, if you hover over them, these will say EM, thermal, kinetic, and explosive. These are the flavours of damage. Mjolnir missiles, for example, do pure EM damage. So if you have very low resistance in EM, which is common on shield ships, you will be weak to EM damage. You will be weak to Mjolnir missiles. Lasers do a combination of EM and thermal damage. Autocannons can mix and match. Blasters do kinetic and thermal damage, etc., etc. Different drones do different flavors. Hobgoblins, for example, do thermal damage. Warriors do explosive. Wardens do kinetic, etc., etc., etc. These resistances are how much of the incoming damage in that specific flavor is going to be removed before being applied to your pure HP. So if you have a resistance of 50%, you will remove half the damage that is being done to your ship in that flavor. Going back to my 5000 EHP example ship with 500 DPS, let's say that that ship was shooting me with thermal missiles and I have a 50% DPS. That means that instead of it taking 10 seconds to kill me, it would take him 20 seconds to kill me. Because half of his damage would be negated by my resistance. Now, if you know what damage type you will be facing, you can use this to your advantage by ignoring resistance holes that you know your damage will not deal and increasing your resistances in what you know he will deal. This is usually done in PvE. There are some cases where it can be used in PvP, but more often I would recommend using what's known as a rainbow tank, i.e. try to have equal resistances across the board in all four flavors.
Is that same as what people call Omni-Tank?
Indeed. Rainbow tank and Omni tank is the same thing. Same goes for Omni damage and Rainbow damage. If you deal all full damage types, you are a Omni damage ship. Geckos, for example, deal Omni damage. Equal damage of all four resistances. Now,
And the effective hit points is also based on some kind of... is it based on if you are taking Omni damage, or is it based on an average of your resistances?
it is based on Omni damage. It assumes that you are taking 25% in each flavor. i.e. 25 of the incoming DPS will be in EM, 25% in thermal, 25% in kinetic, blah, 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 blah. Now, they are also arranged down in 3 rows. The topmost row is your shield, then comes your armor, and at the bottom, your hull. This is also reflected on the far left-hand side, which displays the pure HP in each slot. For example, the current ship I have has 812 HP in shield, 724 in armor, and 1250 in structure. Now what this tells me, of course, is that it might be a good idea to hull tank my ship, because that's where most of my HP is. And if I were in PvP, that is indeed what I would have done with this particular one. It is generally a good idea to tank the heaviest section of your tank, either your shield, your armor, or in certain cases, your hull. But hull has several disadvantages that I'll be going over later. Now, the top left-hand number is a bit more complicated. If you left click on the little arrow next to it, you will have 4 options: armor repair rate, hull repair rate, passive shield recharge, and shield boost rate. This tells you how many pure HP you repair per second. It will not tell you how many EHP per second you repair, which is more useful. I'll be going over EHPS later on. Are there any questions at all as it comes to the defense tab before you move on? Nope. Okay then. Targeting. Targeting I'm not going to spend as long on. In the top red one next to active defense, that means that you have 1 repair module. If you have 2 repair modules, that number will say 2. If it says 3, you will have 3 repair modules, etc. Not really that useful, mostly confusing, but I get where you come from. Any other questions? Okay. In the top right-hand corner of your targeting tab, you will see your maximum targeting range. This can be increased by both skills, modules, rigs, and implants. Also by certain bursts by command ships. The bigger the number is, the further out you can target. If something is beyond that range, you cannot target them. Quite simple enough. Inside the tab itself, you've got 4 numbers. In the top left-hand corner, you've got how many sensor strength points you have. These come in 4 flavors: magnetometric, gravitometric, LiDAR, and radar. 1 for each race. The higher the number is, the harder you are to scan and the harder you are to ECM. It can be increased by both modules and skills. And implants. Also, I believe, certain drugs. At the bottom left-hand corner is a more important number. This is your signature radius. The higher your signature radius is, the more vulnerable you are to missiles and the easier you are to target. For example, it goes a lot quicker to target something with a 500-meter signature radius than it does to target something with a 50-meter signature radius. This is why it takes much longer to target frigates than it is to target battleships. On the top right, inside the tab, you will have your scan resolution measured in millimeters. The higher that number is, the quicker you can target something. If you want to have something known as an insta-lock thrasher, for example, you like to have that number beyond 1500 millimeters. The higher the number, the quicker you can target someone. If you have a scan resolution of 50 millimeters, it's going to take you 2 minutes to lock a target. Well, I didn't mean to say that exactly 2 minutes, but it's going to take you a long time. At the bottom right-hand corner is the maximum number of targets you can have locked at any time. Now, the maximum it's possible to have is 13. This is only achieved by putting on modules and having max skills. If you do not use any modules, the maximum is 10, and it varies based on ships. It will say in ship info how many base lock targets you can have, but you can increase that number with certain modules. Any questions as to the targeting tab? No. Navigation. Again, the most important number is on the top right-hand corner. This is your speed. This, of course, can be increased both by skills, modules, drugs, implants, bursts, a lot of things. Most importantly, you would increase this number by either an afterburner or a micro-warp drive. Inside the tab itself, you have your ship's mass, which does impact what wormholes you can jump through, also how effective micro-warp drives and afterburners are. At the bottom left, you have your ship warp speed, which can be increased by certain rigs, also a lob slot, but I do not recommend that because they are insanely expensive. And it is based upon ship type, i.e. frigates will warp quicker than battleships. The fastest warping ship, to my knowledge, is the Leopard specialized Mars shuttle, which warps at 30 astronomical units per second. An astronomical unit, for those who do not know, is the distance between the real-life Earth and the real-life Sun, i.e. about 8 light minutes. At the top right, inside the navigation window, is your inertia modifier. This is not critical to your knowledge, but it can be modified by modules and skills. The more important one is at the bottom right. This is your align time. How long it will take you from a full stop until you are entering warp. If that time is below 2 seconds, you are what we call an insta-warp ship. This means that you have a very high chance of warping away before anyone has a chance of locking you up, which can be very handy if you're trying to escape. Any questions as to the navigations tab? No. Last tab is the drones tab. Now at the top right hand corner you can see exactly how many drone DPS you deal. You can also see this in your offense tab if you have drones in your ship. Inside the tab itself, the top left hand corner shows how many bandwidth you have in megabits per second. A light drone will occupy 5 megabits per second, a medium drone will occupy 10, and a heavy drone will occupy 25. There is one more drone that occupies 50, and that is the Gecko, the super heavy drone. Although the Gecko costs, what, 60 million now, so I don't recommend using it in PvP. This number will show you how many you use versus how many you have available. So if that number is 00, you can't use any drones. If that number is 0 out of 25, that means that you are currently not using any drones, even though you could use, for example, either 1 heavy, 2 medium and a light, or 5 light drones. I tend to always recommend you use 5 drones. And it also tends to be a good idea to keep them all of the same type, i.e. either all 5 light, all 5 medium, or all 5 heavy, although of course there are exceptions, and loads of them. The bottom left-hand number is how many drones you currently have active. Again, that number, if you're using drones, should be 5. The top right-hand inside the tab is how far away you can control a drone. The maximum, without using modules, is 60 kilometers. This is increased by skills. You can also fit on certain high slot modules that increase the drone control range. Drone link augmenters, I believe they're called, if I remember correct.
Yes.
Any questions as to the numbers in the drones tab? Nope. Alrighty then. Any questions as to any of the numbers at all? Have I done that good of a job explaining? Okay. Then we will be up. Xavius?
Oh, I was just gonna say I'm tracking everything you're saying, man. Just to let you know that people are listening.
Awesome. Very nice to know I'm not talking to a wall. Right. The simulator is the in-game tool used to simulate fits before you have to buy the modules. This can be very handy. For example, I can't tell you how many times I've bought a weapon and then figured out, oh, I don't have enough power grid for it. I shouldn't have bought it. Shit, what do I do with it now? That's very annoying. So what you do to open your simulator is on the top right hand corner, you'll see a little grayed out version of your ship from the side. And if you hover over it, it'll say enter simulation mode. I want you to click this button now. If you are currently sitting in a ship, and I assume you are, you will notice that the interface changes slightly. Your ship is now a ghost, and many of the modules will have turned green. If you left click on a weapon, for example, it will turn red. This means that it overheats. And you'll notice in the offense tab that the DPS increases when you overheat modules. Or overheat weapons, I should say. Same goes for overheating prop modules. If you overheat a prop module, you're going to go faster. You can also overheat webifiers to see that their range increases by hovering over them. You can overheat your tanking modules, your resistance modules, to see that this affects what happens in your statistics, in your attributes, I should say. Sorry. Can you all see this? Have you all tried it out?
Yep.
Yep.
Now, you'll also notice that while in simulation mode, you can freely take stuff out. You can freely remove stuff with no problem. You can remove charges, you can remove modules, you can remove anything. And if you click the exit simulation button, your ship is completely unaffected. Please go back into simulation mode now if you exited it. On the left-hand side of the big circle, you will see a wrench. I want you to click that button to open up the wrench menu. If it was already open and clicking the wrench closed it, please open it again. The wrench menu has two sections, hulls and fits and hardware. In hulls and fits is where your imported and saved fits are stored. These are both in corporation fittings and in personal fittings. You can search by cruisers, by blockade runners, by battleships, by frigates, by whatever you want. You can even try to simulate citadels if you like. To do this, why don't we all simulate an assault frigate together? A retribution, for example. So go into the hulls and fits menu, click on the assault frigate section, click on the retribution, and on the right hand side to the retribution you will see a UFO symbol, and if you hover over it, it'll say simulate. Click that button and a ghost version of the retribution appears. Now we can go into the hardware section and we can choose all the modules we like to try to put on it. You can also filter these modules, and I recommend doing so. From left to right, the filters are low slot, mid slot, high slot, rig slot, drones, hull restrictions, which means that only show modules that will fit onto this ship. For example, if we click this button, capital modules and bastion modules will be removed, for example. And covert ops cloaks, for example, will be removed if we click that button. If you filter by resources, you can choose to either filter by total CPU, power grid and calibration you have left, or by remaining CPU, power grid and calibration left. I definitely recommend the latter. And the final one, far right, is filter by skills. This means that if you click this button, only modules that you can actually use will appear. Beneath the filters are two separate sections, modules and charges. Charges, obviously, are things like ammunition, probes, bombs, cap booster charges, mining crystals, scripts, command burst charges, things like that. Fuel, basically. or ammo. And in modules, you have your modules. In your very familiar sections from the market, split into electronic warfare, harvest equipment, shield, hull and armor, turrets and bays, rigs, subsystems, you name it. Now in here, you can try to put on, for example, if you go into the hull and armor section, armor repairers, you can put on a civilian armor repairer onto the Retribution. And you can see that in the right-hand side of the fitting interface, your stats will have changed. Specifically, the HPS will have changed. And if you go onto armor plates and put on 100mm steel plates, you will see that the total number of HP in your armor will increase. Doing this, you can experiment without having to actually buy the module. And you will notice that faction and storyline modules, officer modules, Dead Space modules, all this is available for your testing and simulating pleasure without you having to spend hundreds of billions of ISK buying it all. This is a very, very useful tool, and I highly recommend you use it. Okay, as to how to use it, I will now go over to the most important section of today's lecture, fitting mentality. The 3 rules for fitting. Number 1, the first thing you need to do before you even think of fitting up a ship is picking a job. Pick a single thing you want your ship to do. For my example today, I'm going to take sniping. I want to snipe. That is my job. That is what I want to fit out to do. Number 2, select a ship with bonuses, traits, and stats towards that job. So for my example, ships with traits like optimal range, tracking speed could be one of them. Optimal range, though, being the most important one. So I want a ship that can use long-range weapons and have bonuses to optimal range. I'm going to choose a Cormorant for today. This is a Caldari destroyer. You can all simulate it now. You will notice that it has 7 turret hardpoints and a single utility or launcher slot. And it has 3 mid slots, 2 low slots. Perfect. And it also has bonuses to optimal range and tracking speed. You'll notice that it both has a roll bonus of 50% to optimal range and a level bonus of 10% per level in optimal range. This means that it can get insane ranges, which makes it a superb sniper. I select the Cormorant for my sniper job. Third step, fit the Cormorant with modules that increase its ability to do the one job you have selected. So to continue my example, I would fit it with the biggest railguns I could, because the bigger the railgun, the longer its range, railgun being the long-range equivalent of blasters, the hybrid weapons, and that is the one that the Cormorant can use. I would fit it with 7 150mm railguns. I would also fit it with tracking computers to increase its optimal range even further, and I would fit it with a micro warp drive in order to make it capable of staying at long range, at keeping distance, staying far away from its hostiles. In the low slots, I would fit either tracking enhancers, which increase both optimal range and tracking speed even further, and magnetic field stabilizers, which increases DPS. In the rigs, I would either choose to fit it with a symbolic shield tank or further increasing either optimal range, DPS or speed. Do you all see the mentality I've gone through here? I've picked a single job I want to do. I've picked a ship that is superbly capable of doing that job because it has bonuses and attributes, slot layout to do that one single job I wanted to do. And I fit on modules that increase its ability to do that one single job I wanted it to do. I haven't wasted time putting a launcher in there because I don't need it, and it would waste fitting resources to do so. I would leave that final utility slot empty. I have fitted it with optimal range increasing modules like tracking computers and tracking enhancers. I've fitted it with a micro warp drive to increase its ability to stay at long range, and I fitted it with low slot modules that increase its ability to do damage at long range. I've stayed with my one job the entire time. This means that my ship is awesome at sniping and crap at everything else. But if I play my cards correctly, I'm untouchable. Because I'm too far away from it for anyone to do anything. I'm 150 kilometers away, nobody can reach me, and by the time they do, I can warp away. But if somebody catches me at close range, I'm dead. Maximizing your advantage is the name of the game in EVE. It's much better to be awesome at one job than kind of okay at 4. If you try to do everything on a single ship, you are going to fail. So, fit on a single tank, either shield, or armor, or hull, or speed. Fit on a single weapon type, either long range or short range, and only one meta subgroup, i.e. all the weapons need to have the same name. So don't put on 125mm compressed coil gun and 125mm railgun, because they have different stats. They have different DPS, they have different reload, they have different cycle time, they have different optimal ranges, etc., etc. Have them all do exactly the same, so you can group them. Have on a single tank, have a single purpose to what you are doing in your ship. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but these 3 steps will enable you to fit 95% of all situations. I'm going to go over the steps one more time. Number 1, find out the one single job you want to do in your ship. Number 2, select a ship with bonuses, traits, and slot layouts that support the one single job you want to do. Number 3, fit the modules that increase its ability to do that single job you've selected. Does this make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Yep.
So, now we are perfectly timed. That was exactly an hour. I'm very proud of myself now. Now we've reached the student testing part of the class. I am going to link 2 ships in the cafe. I'm going to link 2 fits. Now what's going to happen is I want you to send me an EVE mail back to me, to the character I'm going to link it with comments on each of the 2 fits. One of them is going to be called Test Fit. It is a Caldari Navy hookbill. It's a frigate. I want you to tell me how you would improve it. It is fitted kind of okay, but there are a lot of things you can do to improve it. I want you to use the fitting simulator to do this. I want you to send me back a improved fit with comments as to why you've chosen to do what you did. The second fit is going to be a Merlin, and it is going to be fitted all wrong. There are so many errors on this fit, it makes me itch just to look at it. I want you to find as many errors as you can and point them out to me. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Based upon those replies that I get, I'm going to put check marks into the student tracker. Until 2400 today. It should take you 4 minutes to spot the errors in the wrong fit and to... I'm not demanding that you give me perfect fits.
Have you already linked it up?
I have not yet linked it, no.
Okay. Just making sure.
I'm going to link the wrong fit now. There's the wrong fit. Everything is wrong on this fit. I want you to find as many errors as you can and point them out to me. And send me an email those errors. And there is the test fit. I want you to the best of your ability, improve this fit. It is possible. I'm not demanding a perfect fit, but it is possible to improve this. Send me a message by email detailing how you would do this, and then I will give check marks based on it. And you have to do this by 2400 Eve time today. It should not take you long. And of course, I'm going to remain here open to questions and comments. Are there any questions before we round off the actual lecture part and end the recording?
Nothing I can think of.
Awesome.
I think I kind of got here late to the party. I just saw a bunch of people and I decided to listen in when I joined in.
Well, that's good. Hopefully you caught the important bits.
I think maybe just for it to be on record or recorded actually, it would be useful to specify why we would want pure DPS over alpha in PvE and the other way around in PvP.
Okay, I can give a quick roundabout on that. In PvE, it is very rare that there is Logi on the field. It does happen, specifically in the anomic missions, but it is quite rare. And PvE targets generally have very weak local repair, which means that alpha is not important. However, in PvE, you very often encounter ships that are supported by Logi ships. Now, if you manage to kill those ships before reps land, the reps doesn't matter. So a high alpha can effectively render irrelevant an entire logistics wing. If you can kill a target before the target even notices that you're killing them, it doesn't matter that there's a Logi wing on field, which effectively makes you that much more effective. This is called alphaing somebody off the field. And when you manage to do it, it is the best feeling. Watching target after target just disappear, watching the enemy Logi not being able to do jack shit. It is the most satisfying feeling. But to do that, you need a high alpha and you need to coordinate within the fleet so that everyone fires at the same time. I remember being in a fleet full of maelstroms, and we all had artillery, which meant that we all dealt 15,000 damage on each volley, but there was a 15-second delay between each shot. But we coordinated this and we timed it, and we were 50 maelstroms, which meant that every time we fired, somebody died. It didn't matter what they were in because we basically fired a wall of bullets at this guy, which basically disintegrated him in a single second. This is why alpha can be very important in PvP, but in PvE, alpha is not that important because, one, targets tend to die rather quick anyway, and they don't have high enough EHP to make it worth it with high alpha. Also, high alpha ships tend to do less pure DPS, i.e. damage over longer time. And in PvE, DPS over time is king. because you have loads of different targets, you're usually alone, and there is very limited rep capability on the hostiles.